Hello everyone, and welcome to this video that I'm doing today. And this is in response to a video that Beatle Brad did a couple of weeks back. And I just want to say, Brad, I apologise for the delay in uploading my response to this. I have been meaning to get round to it, and I finally have now. But part of the reason is because it actually took me a while to think of some songs for this video. And for those of you who don't know what this is about, it's basically the idea of which solo Beatles songs would have worked as songs by the Beatles if they were still together. And so I've got one for each solo Beatle, and I'll start off with George Harrison's. And the song I've selected for this is from his All Things Must Pass album, and it's Apple Scruffs. Now I think that song would have worked quite well anyway, because it was about the people who George Harrison saw when he used to go to the Apple offices and recording studios in the late 60s anyway, so kind of around the time of the White Album and Abbey Road and Let It Be. And therefore I think it would have worked well on one of those albums, any of those three to be honest. And I think the Beatles probably would have liked that song anyway, because I'm sure obviously they would have shared that experience as well, and I think the Beatles could have made a pretty good job of that song. But hats off to George, I think he does that song very well indeed, and it's one of my favourites in the All Things Must Pass album. So that was my song for George Harrison. As for John Lennon, I've gone for Whatever Gets You Through the Night, and really my thinking behind this one was just that by the late 60s that they were starting to do stuff like Revolution and up-tempo stuff like that, and I think John Lennon and Paul McCartney could have shared some really good lead vocals on Whatever Gets You Through the Night and made into a catchy Beatles track, and I'm sure it would have been popular in the late 60s as it was for John Lennon in the mid 70s. But yeah, that's what I've got for John Lennon. Now as for Ringo, the track I've gone for is Goodnight Vienna, the title track from the Goodnight Vienna album obviously. And interestingly, that one actually was written by John Lennon, so I suppose you could say in some respects the Beatles did have some influence over it. But anyway, Goodnight Vienna, I just think I think that song would have worked well as one of the Ringo tracks on the White Album, because it does some pretty varied stuff on there. Don't Pass Me By, Good Night, and all that stuff. And I think Goodnight Vienna would have worked quite well on there as one of the softer tracks, a bit like Honey Pie that Paul McCartney does, stuff like that. Yeah, okay, and that's my Ringo track. Now for the Paul McCartney one, a few different songs came to mind. The first one that came to mind was the opening track to his second album, Ram, and the track is Too Many People. I think Too Many People could have been a pretty good Beatles song, and it was only a couple of years after the Beatles broke up really, so you know, I suppose you could say his solo stuff was still developing over that time anyway. But I think Too Many People would have worked well on maybe something like Abbey Road, and it's one of my favourite tracks off Ram anyway. And I think John Lennon could have lent his talent to that as well and made it into a great Lennon-McCartney composition. But it's a great track as it is, so I'm not trying to take anything away from Too Many People. Another one that came to mind was Put It There, from the Flowers in the Dirt album, and I do keep coming back to the White Album, but I'm going to go back there once more. And the reason I picked that one is because it's always reminded me in a way of Paul McCartney's track I Will from the White Album. And I suppose arguably you could say the White Album is kind of the development of the Beatles solo careers from an early stage, because a lot of the stuff they were doing there, it was only kind of one or two Beatles in the studio, or it was just like the four Beatles, well, maybe not so much Ringo, doing the style of music that they preferred, and then maybe just tinker around with it from the other Beatles. But yeah, I think Put It There could have been a typical Paul McCartney style Beatles track, particularly from the late 60s. Paul McCartney's obviously the Beatle who was always known for doing kind of the romantic ballads like Till There Was You, P.S. I Love You. And so I think Put It There wouldn't have been out of place on a Beatles album, early or late actually. I think it might have even fit on one of the early albums just as well. And the final track that I have with Paul McCartney that I thought possibly could work as a Beatles track was Let Them In. And the reason this song came to mind was I just think it's the sort of thing that as the Beatles music kind of changed and developed towards the late 60s, they were doing a bit more interesting stuff, and I think Let Them In, I don't know why, that's always just been quite an interesting track for me. So yeah, I think to be honest, any of those songs could have been decent Beatles tracks as well as solo tracks, but every song that I've mentioned in this video, I think has definitely worked well as a solo track, and I'm not saying it could be improved in any way. Just ideas I had for this video. Right, so that concludes this video. So I hope you enjoyed this, Brad, and anyone else who's watching. And thank you so much, and I'll see you all next time.